On the morning of the 14th of May, 2011, a woman sat on a collapsible stool at the edge of the old harbor in Latchi, Cyprus, her easel positioned to capture the interplay of early sunlight on the fleet of small fishing trawlers and leisure craft, moored against the stone quay. To the casual observer, she was Alina Dubois, a Belgian expatriate in her late 30s, a woman of moderate but independent means who had adopted the transient, sun-drenched life of a semi-serious artist. Her focus, however, was not on the color of the water or the texture of the weathered hulls for aesthetic purposes. Her gaze was analytical, her memory archival, and her purpose lethal. Her canvas was a functional prop, a piece of tradecraft as essential as the high-resolution, long-range monocular she had used from her apartment window before dawn. Her true objective was a single, unremarkable vessel named the Al-Noor, a 22-meter fishing boat whose peeling blue paint and rust-streaked scuppers belied its function as the primary logistical artery for a sophisticated arms smuggling network, funneling advanced Iranian naval weaponry into the Gaza Strip. The woman, whose real name had been erased from every official record and existed only in a single, heavily encrypted file within a server complex buried beneath Tel Aviv, was an operative of the Mossad's Caesarea division, and her quiet, solitary artistic endeavors were the final observational phase of a mission designed to surgically sever that artery without the target ever realizing a surgeon had been present. The strategic problem facing Israel's intelligence community had become acute in the preceding 18 months, representing a significant and alarming escalation in the asymmetrical warfare capabilities of militant factions operating from Gaza. For years, the primary threat had been terrestrial rockets, mortars, and tunnels, but a new and more insidious danger was emerging from the sea. Signals intelligence and human sources had confirmed that Iran's Quds Force, through a labyrinthine series of cutouts and proxies, was successfully supplying its Gazan clients with a new generation of naval armaments that threatened to alter the tactical balance in the eastern Mediterranean. This was not the crude, improvised weaponry of the past. The shipments included C-802 sea-skimming anti-ship missiles, advanced, pressure-sensitive sea mines, and even nascent prototypes of GPS-guided torpedoes designed for use by combat divers. The implications were dire, extending far beyond the immediate threat to Israeli Navy patrol boats enforcing the maritime blockade. These weapons placed the country's multi-billion-dollar offshore natural gas platforms, critical components of its energy independence, within striking range. They also posed a substantial threat to the commercial shipping lanes leading to the ports of Ashdod and Haifa, potentially allowing a militant group to hold a chokehold on a significant portion of the nation's economy. Initial attempts to counter this flow of arms had followed a conventional and increasingly ineffective playbook. Naval interdictions on the high seas were a blunt instrument. The smugglers used a constantly shifting fleet of civilian vessels, making positive identification from a distance nearly impossible without precise, real-time intelligence that was seldom available. Stopping and searching dozens of fishing boats or small cargo ships created diplomatic friction with countries like Egypt, Lebanon, and Cyprus, and often yielded nothing, while simultaneously revealing Israeli intelligence gaps and operational patterns to the adversary. On the rare occasions a confirmed weapons transport was identified, the rules of engagement were fraught with complexity, risking civilian casualties and international condemnation. An airstrike against a port or a suspected warehouse in Gaza was an even less palatable option, guaranteed to produce collateral damage and trigger a wider conflict. The smugglers' network was resilient, decentralized, and deeply embedded within legitimate maritime commerce, rendering traditional military and intelligence methods both high risk and low yield. The enemy had created a system that was largely immune to overt force, necessitating a solution that was equally subtle, deniable, and devastatingly effective. At the heart of this logistical web was a man known within the intelligence community only as the Engineer, a nom de guerre for Adnan al-Hamri. His profile, painstakingly assembled from fragments of human intelligence, intercepted communications, and financial tracking, painted a picture of a formidable and highly atypical adversary. Born in Khan Yunis, al-Hamri had excelled academically and earned a scholarship to study mechanical and marine engineering at a technical university in Hamburg, Germany. It was there, during the late 1990s, that he was radicalized, not by fiery clerics, but by a quiet, intellectual circle of expatriate activists who blended anti-Western sentiment with sophisticated technical expertise. He was not a frontline fighter or a charismatic leader. He was a systems architect, a man who saw logistics not as a support function, but as the central pillar of armed resistance. Upon returning to the region, he applied his German-honed skills in precision and process management to the chaotic world of clandestine operations. He designed and oversaw the modification of the vessels, reinforcing hulls to carry heavy ordnance, fabricating hidden compartments with baffling magnetic signatures to evade detection, and upgrading engines for short, high-speed bursts to outrun patrols during the final leg of the journey. His true genius, however, lay in his understanding of paranoia as an operational security tool. He compartmentalized his network to an extreme degree. The crew of a transport vessel knew nothing of the cargo's ultimate origin. The acquisition team in Iran had no knowledge of the specific maritime routes, and the financial backers moved funds through unrelated hawala networks. Al-Hamri operated through a series of cutouts, never meeting anyone face-to-face, communicating through single-use encrypted messaging systems that were changed weekly. He was a ghost in the machine he had built, a meticulous, patient, and invisible logistician who was single-handedly professionalizing the art of maritime arms smuggling. The failure of conventional methods forced a radical reassessment within the Mossad. The consensus that emerged from a series of acrimonious and intense planning sessions at headquarters was that targeting the shipments was a losing strategy. The only viable alternative was to target the system itself. The proposal that gained traction was audacious, carrying an extraordinary level of risk but promising a uniquely permanent and deniable solution. Codenamed Operation Siren's Song, the plan was not to sink a boat, but to make the sea itself appear to be the enemy. The objective was to degrade and destroy the network's key logistical assets, the specially modified transport vessels, in a manner that would be consistently attributed to catastrophic mechanical failure, poor maintenance, or simple bad luck. This would sow discord and paranoia within the network, as the engineer, a man obsessed with precision, would be unable to explain the repeated, seemingly random failures of his meticulously prepared craft. The strategy was one of psychological and material attrition. To achieve this, it required an operative to get close enough to the vessels to perform acts of sophisticated, untraceable sabotage. This operative would need to exist for years inside a hostile or semi-hostile environment, living a cover identity so flawless and mundane that it would be beyond suspicion. The operation's success hinged not on an explosion, but on the silent, inexorable process of corrosion, on a broken drive shaft in a storm-tossed sea, on a rudder failure at the worst possible moment. The primary obstacle was the human element, finding, training, and deploying an individual with the unique blend of technical skills, linguistic ability, and psychological fortitude to survive years of deep, isolated cover was a monumental challenge. The consequences of failure were absolute. The capture of a Mossad operative engaged in sabotage on foreign soil would be a diplomatic catastrophe, and for the operative herself, it would mean certain capture, torture, and execution. The candidate selected for Siren's Song was a 31-year-old naval officer, a lieutenant in the elite Shayatet 13 Naval Commando Unit. Though her role was not in direct combat, but in the unit's highly secretive technical development branch. Her service record was exemplary, noting a genius-level aptitude for marine engineering, metallurgy, and hydrodynamics. She was a qualified combat diver and fluent in English and French. But it was her psychological profile and personal history that made her the ideal, if tragic, candidate. 6 years prior, her parents, civilian tourists, had been killed in a suicide bombing in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, an attack that bore the logistical fingerprints of the same militant network she was now being asked to dismantle. The Mossad's internal psychologists conducted a lengthy and invasive evaluation, concluding that her grief had metastasized not into reckless hatred, but into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She was not seeking vengeance in a conventional sense. She was seeking to impose order on the chaos that had destroyed her family, to methodically and dispassionately deconstruct the machine that had produced it. Her motivation was deemed stable, a deeply embedded, non-volatile fuel source that could sustain her through the crushing isolation of the mission. She accepted the assignment without hesitation, understanding that it meant the complete and utter death of her current identity. The person she was would cease to exist, and a new one, a fiction, would be born in her place. Her preparation was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar undertaking, a process of systematic deconstruction and reconstruction of a human being. She was moved to a secure facility in the Negev desert, a place designed to simulate the psychological pressures of isolation. Her formal training began with language. While already fluent in French, she spent a year with a private tutor from Brussels to acquire the precise Walloon accent, slang, and cultural nuances of a native Belgian. She simultaneously undertook an intensive course in modern Greek and the Cypriot dialect, focusing on the specialized vocabulary of the maritime and fishing communities. Her technical skills were honed further, not in a military context, but in a civilian one. She spent months working incognito alongside aging mechanics in small boatyards in Italy and Greece, learning how to repair aging diesel engines and patch fiberglass hulls, using nothing but common hand tools. This was critical for her legend. Her knowledge needed to appear practical and self-taught, not institutional. The core of her operational training focused on the unique requirements of the mission. She was drilled relentlessly in advanced counter-surveillance techniques, learning to detect and evade watchers on foot, in vehicles, and through technical means. She mastered the art of clandestine photography with miniaturized equipment and the placement of micro-transmitters. Most importantly, she was trained in the application of the specialized sabotage tools developed for the operation, practicing for hundreds of hours in a massive indoor water tank where exact mock-ups of the target vessels were submerged. Her psychological conditioning was the most grueling component. She endured weeks of sensory deprivation, simulated interrogations, and exercises designed to break down her will and then rebuild it around the core of her cover identity. She learned to compartmentalize her own mind, walling off her past, her emotions, and her true purpose behind the meticulously constructed facade of her new persona. The creation of the legend for Alina Dubois was an exercise in obsessive detail, a masterpiece of fiction designed to withstand the most intense scrutiny. The Mossad's Documents Division created a flawless paper trail stretching back to her birth. A birth certificate was procured from a municipal archive in Charleroi, Belgium. School records, vaccination certificates, and even childhood dental records were expertly forged and, where possible, inserted into real, dusty archives. A Belgian passport and national identity card were produced, not as forgeries, to which they were identical, but as genuine documents issued through a compromised channel within the Belgian civil service. A small, unassuming apartment was rented in her name in the Saint-Gilles district of Brussels, and for 2 years prior to her deployment, a logistics team populated it with her life. They subscribed to magazines, paid utility bills, and established a banking history with a local branch of KBC Bank, showing a modest inheritance being drawn down at a plausible rate. A social media presence was carefully curated by the Psychological Operations Unit, showing a gradual evolution of an amateur painter's interest in seascapes, with photos posted from trips to the coasts of Brittany and Normandy. Her artistic skills were intentionally kept at the level of a talented amateur, good enough to be credible but not so good as to attract professional attention. The final, and perhaps most crucial, element of her cover was the purchase of her boat, the Cygnus, a 10-meter Jeannot Sun Odyssey sailboat. The vessel was bought through a third-party broker in France and sailed to a secure Mossad naval facility near Haifa, where it was discreetly refitted. Its auxiliary engine was modified for ultra-quiet running. Hidden compartments for her specialized equipment were built into the fiberglass hull, and a sophisticated, encrypted burst transmission satellite communications system was concealed within the mast. To complete the picture of a solitary, slightly eccentric woman, her handler made a final suggestion, approved after brief consideration. She would acquire 2 rescue cats from a shelter in Cyprus upon her arrival. The animals would serve as a powerful psychological buffer against isolation, and their presence would project an aura of harmless domesticating that no amount of forged paperwork could replicate. The technological tools developed for Operation Siren Song by the Mossad's technical division, known as Neviot, were as subtle and deniable as the mission concept itself. The primary sabotage device was not an explosive, but a chemical agent. Eitan, the division's chief metallurgist, formulated a thixotropic, grease-like substance with a base of silicone and ground Teflon for lubrication. Suspended within this innocuous-seeming lubricant were microscopic, encapsulated particles of a highly reactive gallium-indium alloy. The capsules were designed to break down only under the specific combined stresses of high-frequency vibration and sustained exposure to saltwater galvanism. Once released, the liquid metal alloy would initiate a process called liquid metal embrittlement upon contact with the specific grade of marine-grade stainless steel used for propeller shafts and the bronze alloys used in rudder pintles and bearings. The gallium would penetrate the grain boundaries of the metal, dramatically reducing its tensile strength and ductility without causing visible corrosion or leaving any chemical trace that would be detectable in a standard post-mortem analysis. The failure would be catastrophic and would appear to be a classic case of metal fatigue. The substance was to be delivered in small, magnetically attached canisters designed to look like marine anodes, which would be applied by a diver. To aid in targeting and intelligence gathering, another team developed miniature GPS trackers hermetically sealed within realistic-looking artificial barnacle shells, which could be attached to a vessel's hull during a close pass. For the final phase of the operation, a compact, autonomous underwater vehicle was developed, resembling a large tuna, which could be launched from the Cygnus to perform last-minute, close-in visual reconnaissance of a target vessel's underside, confirming the precise placement of key mechanical components. Every piece of technology was designed with a single guiding principle: to leave no evidence that it had ever existed. In the spring of 2009, nearly 2 years after her training began, Alina Dubois sailed the Cygnus into the eastern Mediterranean. Her insertion was deliberately slow and meandering, a multi-month journey designed to build her legend. She spent weeks in various Greek islands, docking in small marinas, paying her fees in cash, and becoming a familiar, if distant, face in the cruising community. She was quiet, polite, and kept to herself, her Belgian accent and solitary habits marking her as just another one of the countless Northern Europeans who had sought a simpler life in the Aegean. She sketched and painted, selling a few pieces to tourists for modest sums, reinforcing her identity as an artist. By the time she arrived in Cyprus, she was no longer an operative playing a role. She was Alina Dubois. Her patterns of behavior were established and unremarkable. She would spend a few weeks in a port, then set off for a few days of solo sailing, anchoring in secluded coves to paint. These excursions were her operational windows, allowing her to test her communications equipment, conduct reconnaissance of potential smuggling routes, and maintain her physical and technical skills far from any watchful eyes. She lived in a state of perpetual low-grade tension. Every interaction, every purchase, every conversation, a calculated performance. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion that she managed with the iron discipline instilled during her training and the simple, grounding routine of caring for her 2 cats, whom she had named Castor and Pollux. For over a year, she did nothing but observe, integrate, and wait, becoming part of the maritime landscape, a ghost hiding in plain sight. Her patience was rewarded in the autumn of 2010. Through a combination of her own meticulous observations and a whispered intelligence cue from her handler, delivered via a coded message embedded in a weather forecast. On a shortwave numbers station, she positively identified the Al-Nur as the primary transport vessel. It was not a single discovery, but a slow accretion of incriminating details. She noted its irregular sailing patterns, its unusual modifications including an oversized engine exhaust for a boat of its class, and the fact that its crew, while ostensibly Cypriot fishermen, spoke amongst themselves in a specific Palestinian dialect of Arabic. Using her long-range monocular from her apartment overlooking the harbor, she documented crew changes, refueling procedures, and maintenance schedules. During her sailing excursions, she would coincidentally cross paths with the Al-Nur in open water, allowing her to attach 2 of the barnacle trackers to its hull during a carefully executed close pass, feigning engine trouble to elicit a brief, casual interaction. The data from these trackers, transmitted in encrypted bursts to an overhead satellite, confirmed the vessel's operational profile. It would follow legitimate fishing routes for weeks, then suddenly make a high-speed nighttime run to a designated rendezvous point off the Egyptian coast, where it would take on its cargo from a larger mothership before making the final dash to a secluded beach south of Rafah. The final piece of the puzzle came from a SIGINT intercept that indicated the network was preparing for its most ambitious shipment yet. a set of 4 advanced anti-ship missiles, a true game-changing weapon system. The intelligence also provided the critical operational window. The Al-Nur was scheduled for 2 days of minor, off-the-books maintenance at a quiet, isolated anchorage on the Akamas Peninsula, a remote and largely unpopulated area on the western tip of Cyprus, immediately before its departure for the rendezvous. The time to act had arrived. On the designated night, the conditions were perfect. A new moon provided absolute darkness, and a steady offshore breeze created a light chop on the water, enough to mask the sound of her approach. At 0100 hours, Alina Dubois slipped out of her apartment, dressed in a dark, form-fitting wetsuit. She carried nothing that could identify her. She made her way not to the main harbor, but to a small, hidden cove, a kilometer down the coast, where she had stashed her operational gear. The equipment was contained in a single waterproof pack, a military-grade rebreather that produced no exhaust bubbles, a set of non-magnetic ceramic tools, and 4 of the limpet-like canisters containing the corrosive grease. She launched a small, black inflatable boat, powered by a nearly silent electric trolling motor, and navigated by a compass and the faint silhouette of the coastline. The 20-minute journey to the Akamas anchorage was a study in controlled tension. Her heart rate was steady, her breathing slow and rhythmic through the rebreather's mouthpiece. She was no longer Alina the artist. She was the naval commando she had once been, a creature of the sea and the darkness. She located the Al-Nur riding at anchor, a dark shape against the slightly less dark water. She circled it once, from a distance of 200 meters, scanning for any sign of a watch on deck. There was none. She made her final approach from the stern, the quietest sector, and slipped into the water without a splash. Submerged in the cool Mediterranean water, she was in her element. The world was reduced to the narrow beam of her dive light and the sound of her own breathing. She ran a hand along the hull, feeling for the familiar lines of the keel and propeller shaft housing. The intelligence gathered by her tuna-like drone on a previous pass had given her a precise mental map of the boat's underside. She worked with a calm, unhurried efficiency that was the product of countless hours of training. First, she located and removed the 2 barnacle trackers she had placed months before, leaving no trace of surveillance. Next, she retrieved the sabotage canisters from her harness. The first 2 were attached magnetically to the port and starboard sides of the propeller shaft's stuffing box, the critical point where the shaft exited the hull. The third was placed on the main bearing of the rudder stock. She saved the 4th and most critical one for the propeller itself, forcing the grease deep into the housing of the variable pitch mechanism, a complex component that was most vulnerable to stress. The final step was to plant a small acoustic beacon, disguised as a piece of marine growth, deep inside the keel cooler intake. This device was inert and would only activate upon sensing the specific pressure changes and acoustic signature of a sinking ship in deep water, allowing the Israeli Navy to later locate the wreck. The entire process took 17 minutes. She conducted a final, tactile check of her work, then pushed off from the hull and swam back to her inflatable, leaving the Al-Nur silently waiting for a catastrophic failure it could not avoid. Her exfiltration was as meticulous as the attack. She returned to the hidden cove, packed her gear, and scuttled the weighted pack, including the rebreather and the inflatable boat, in a deep underwater canyon she had previously mapped. It would never be found. She walked back to her apartment, showered, and was in bed before 0300. At sunrise, she was back on her stool at the main harbor, sketching a different boat, the very picture of a harmless artist. Her legend provided the perfect alibi for her departure. Later that morning, she notified the harbor master that she was leaving for a 2-week sailing trip to the Greek island of Rhodes to find new inspiration. No one batted an eye. Her departure was calm and routine. She did not flee. She simply moved on, following the established pattern of her fictional life. For 2 weeks, she sailed a slow, meandering course westward, carefully monitoring encrypted news feeds through her satellite system. Then, the report came. A Cypriot-flagged fishing vessel, the Al-Nur, was reported overdue and presumed lost in a sudden storm off the coast of Egypt. The initial assessment from maritime authorities cited a likely catastrophic mechanical failure in the heavy seas. There was no mention of foul play, no investigation beyond a cursory review. It was a maritime tragedy, unfortunate but unremarkable. Alina Dubois, now anchored in a quiet bay in Rhodes, felt nothing. There was no elation, no remorse. There was only the quiet, hollow satisfaction of a problem solved, a task completed. Her mission was over. She would spend another 6 months, slowly making her way across the Mediterranean, before docking for the last time in Spain, abandoning the Cygnus and disappearing completely, the ghost of Alina Dubois vanishing as silently as she had arrived. The aftermath of Operation Siren's Song unfolded precisely as its architects had intended, a cascade of secondary effects that were more destructive to the network than the loss of a single vessel. The acoustic beacon on the Al-Noor performed its function flawlessly. Days after the sinking, it began to emit a low-frequency pulse, which was detected by an Israeli Dolphin-class submarine on patrol in the area. The submarine located the wreck at a depth of over 800 meters, far too deep for any salvage attempt by the smugglers. Using a remotely operated vehicle, the Navy was able to survey the debris field and, most importantly, recover several key components of the missile cargo, including the guidance and seeker heads. This provided Israeli military intelligence with an invaluable technical windfall, allowing them to analyze the Iranians' most advanced naval technology and develop effective countermeasures. On the human side, the effect was chaos. The engineer, Adnan al-Hamri, was a man of logic and systems. The concept of random, catastrophic failure was anathema to him. He refused to believe that a vessel he had personally overseen and which had just undergone maintenance could simply fall apart. His paranoia, once a tool for security, became a self-destructive obsession. He launched a brutal internal witch hunt, convinced a traitor within his network had sabotaged the vessel. Suspicions fell on the maintenance crew in Cyprus and the boat's captain. Several members of his network were interrogated and executed, crippling the organization's operational capacity and sowing deep mistrust among the survivors. When a second transport vessel, hastily put into service, suffered a similar fate 6 months later, its engine seizing during a storm after being treated with a different, slower-acting chemical agent by a different Mossad asset, the route was deemed cursed. The smugglers, superstitious sailors at heart, began refusing to crew the missions. The logistical chain, once a model of efficiency, collapsed under the weight of fear, paranoia, and perceived bad luck. The flow of advanced naval weapons into Gaza ceased entirely, not with a bang, but with the quiet corrosion of trust and equipment. The strategic threat was neutralized without a single shot fired and without leaving a single political fingerprint. The woman who had been Neria was given a new identity, a new life in a distant country, forever separated from her past. She had become a ghost, a living embodiment of a successful intelligence operation, unseen, unknown, and profoundly alone. The psychological cost of her silent victory, a burden only she would ever carry. What is the true measure of an operative's success? The completion of the mission, or their ability to live with the person they had to become to achieve it? Can an act of calculated, impersonal destruction, even in the service of national security, ever be separated from the moral weight of its consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.